Well, for over 25 years, the National Center for Science Education has worked at the grassroots to support students, parents, teachers, school board members, and others concerned about evolution education. And for more than 25 years, evolution has been a socially, if not scientifically, controversial issue. Oh, okay, hang on. No, we're good. A few years ago, NCSE began to notice that in legislation being submitted around the country, evolution was being bundled with global warming as topics that teachers should address differently than other subjects in the curriculum. This got us interested in looking at the teaching of global warming, and we found many parallels to our concerns with the teaching of evolution. We decided that the parallels were similar enough and the problems teachers were beginning to face were similar enough that this year we added climate change education to evolution education as topics we help teachers teach. We're still learning about climate change, but it's clear that what we've learned about evolution as a controversial issue can help us in understanding why climate change is a controversial issue. First of all, in discussing evolution today, I'm referring not just to human or biological evolution, but to a general principle that cuts across all sciences. That the universe has had a history, that the past is different from the present, is a concept that informs all of science. There has been cumulative change through time in the universe. So astronomy, biology, geology, and anthropology all are evolutionary sciences. The subject matter of these sciences all reflect cumulative change. In biological evolution, we have the added inference that living things have common ancestors, what Darwin called descent with modification. Also, when discussing climate change opposition today, I appreciate that it takes different forms, and different components of climate change are accepted by different numbers of people. The most severe position is just to deny any global warming whatsoever. It's not getting warmer. Or a second view is it's getting warmer, but humans aren't responsible. A third view is that it's getting warmer, we're responsible, but we can only accommodate rather than prevent disaster. I want you to consider that the first two are scientific issues. Is it getting warmer or isn't it? Are humans responsible or aren't they? The answers should be determined through science, and in fact the data are clear that it's getting warmer and people have a lot to do with it. The third is a policy issue. What should we do about it, if anything? But the scientific issues and the policy issues are often conflated in people's minds. Much as religious conservatives are concerned with the perceived consequences of evolution to their religion than to mere scientific issues, so also the consequences of global warming appear to be motivation for rejection of this science. One similarity, both evolution and climate change are well-accepted ideas within the scientific community, not only in the United States, but internationally. In June 2006, 68 academies of science from around the world signed a statement on evolution, agreeing that the universe, the planet Earth, and living things have all evolved, and that evolution and science should be taught to children. Similarly, not just scientific associations in the United States, but academies of science internationally have agreed that the planet is getting warmer and that people's actions are the main driver of this change. But there's a disconnect between what scientists accept and what the general public accepts. The Pew Foundation found in a survey of AAAS members results that illustrate this disconnect. To the question, human and other living things have evolved over time, the public weighed in 61% agreeing with this compared to 97% of scientists at AAAS. To the question, humans and other living things have existed in their present form since the beginning of time, again, the differences are quite stark, 31% versus 2%. A disconnect exists between the public and scientists on global warming as well. Doran and Kendall Zimmerman surveyed over 3,000 geologists and found a very high percentage of scientists accepting global warming. 90% versus 61% in the general public. The general public data are derived from Gallup Institute data conducted at the same time. A second question asked by Doran and Kendall Zimmerman asked whether global warming is anthropogenic. A high proportion of scientists agreed, 82%, compared to the Gallup data of the general public of only 58%. So one reason why NCSE got into the climate change business is because here is another case in which the public is disconnected from the scientific consensus, and this is affecting science education. The sources here. One thing that we've learned about the public rejection of evolution is that it really isn't just about the science, or even predominantly about the science. People show up at school board meetings to complain about evolution education, but very few of them are there because they feel so strongly that the Cambrian explosion is not represented properly in textbooks. Similarly, in considering the public rejection of climate change, it doesn't appear as if the major concern of people is the quality of dendrochronological data from Siberian boreal forests. There is a lack of understanding of both evolution and climate change that needs to be remedied. Climate change is largely ignored in the pre-college curriculum, and principles of climate science are not well understood by the public. But it isn't only a knowledge deficit issue. And importantly, before someone can learn, he or she must be willing to listen. And there are many factors that keep the fingers in the ears. We have found three commonalities in looking at evolution and global warming. We call them the pillars of rejection of scientific ideas. The first pillar is to challenge, the validity of the science. Evolution or global warming is rejected because the science is supposedly unsettled or weak, obviously contrasting with the actual scientific position. The second is an ideological pillar. Evolution or global warming must be rejected because it is not compatible with some ideological view. With evolution, the ideology is religious. Evolution is not compatible with some forms of Christianity, conservative Christianity. In the case of global warming, it's a different ideology. Political conservatism often looks at global warming as a liberal plot to try to increase the power of central government, or libertarian economics, what one commentator has referred to as free market fundamentalism, views global warming as part of a plot to attack capitalism and encourage socialism. And finally, the third pillar reflects cultural values important to American society: fairness and balance, freedom of speech, letting all voices be heard, etc. An application of this in the educational setting is to propose that students receive, quote, both views and, quote, decide for themselves as a way to develop critical thinking skills. In other contexts, the consensus view of science is derided as being dogmatic, and anti-global warming or anti-evolution views are portrayed as being unfairly discriminated against, as if scientific views were a type of popularity contest. In support of my contention that it's not just about the science, note that the second and third pillars are really about the consequences of the science rather than the science itself. The ideological pillar is key, and I want to talk about that first. When Americans who reject evolution are asked why, they volunteer primarily religious reasons. I believe in Jesus, I believe in the Bible, my religion doesn't allow it, etc. 76% reject evolution for religious reasons, and only 14% volunteer they reject it because they doubt the science. Personally, I think that 14% is inflated. I suspect that everyone who rejects evolution does so for religious reasons. We can conclude that the chief motivation for rejecting evolution is religious views. The particular religious view incompatible with evolution is called special creationism. Now, special creationism is the view that God created the universe and its inhabitants specially in their present form. So the elements that chemists study were created as we see them today, rather than having been produced in explosions of stars. And stars, galaxies, planets, Earth, plants and animals on Earth were all created as we see them today. In other words, evolution has not occurred. There are varieties of special creationism: young Earth creationism, old Earth creationism, intelligent design. All of that is fascinating, and we're up to our nostrils with that at NCSE, but that's not part of my talk today. The point is that all forms of special creationism are incompatible with evolution, which refers to the gradual unfolding and changing of the universe through time. Conservative Christians believe that the Bible is the Word of God and is without error. Genesis must be interpreted literally, with creation taking place in 6 24-hour days. The Bible's parts are also closely connected. In this cartoon from Answers in Genesis, the whole Bible has to be viewed as a seamless web, and if Genesis isn't true, then the whole thing unravels. So acceptance of evolution is thought to mean losing something very important. The consequences of accepting evolution is what matters, not the science. The biology department of a large Midwestern university, asked to design an inset into the floor of the new science building, chose a quote from the famous geneticist Theodosius Dobzhansky, which starts here. Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. The university? Notre Dame. Catholics and mainstream Protestants embrace a theological view called theistic evolution, forms of which accept evolution as the means by which God brought the universe and its inhabitants about. So special creationism is not the only Christian view, nor even the most common. Rejection of evolution is most common among those Christians who interpret Genesis as literally true, although many Catholics and mainstream Protestants are unaware of their denomination's views toward evolution. There is an assumption that political conservatives also reject evolution, but I think there are two variables being conflated here. Conservative Christians hold certain religious views. The inerrancy of the Bible and salvation through a personal relationship with Jesus is very important. They are referred to as evangelicals, fundamentalists, charismatics. They prefer the term conservative Christians, which is how I refer to them. Now, political conservatives, on the other hand, have confidence in capitalism as an economic system. They oppose taxation. They believe in minimal government. They elevate individuality and personal liberty to a high state. And this is combined with confidence in the American myth of the potential for everyone to succeed as a result of their own efforts. Not all religious conservatives are political conservatives. Some of the most energetic workers for the poor and disadvantaged are evangelicals. Not all political conservatives are religious conservatives, obviously. The intersection is known as the religious right. This diagram is relevant to both of the controversies I'm talking about today. Anti-evolutionists reliably include the religious right, but not all religious conservatives are anti-evolutionists. We have some powerful allies among evangelicals in promoting acceptance of evolution. Not all political conservatives are anti-evolutionists. Many political conservatives readily accept evolution because they belong to denominations that are not biblically literalist. With anti-evolutionism, we're picking up those political conservatives who are also our religious conservatives rather than picking up political conservatives per se. Well, what's the situation with global warming? Here also is an ideological foundation for rejecting science, although a different ideology. A considerable amount of survey research indicates that there is a strong political association with views on global warming. This graphic comes from 2010 Pew Foundation research showing a high percentage of Democrats accepting global warming and a much lower percent of Republicans. In 2011, Pew found a slight increase in acceptance of global warming, although down from a high measured in 2004. The political differences remain clear, and this is shown in other polls as well. Part of my difficulty here is that I'm trying to do this left-handed, and I'm particularly inapt at that. There is a small amount of opposition to global warming that stems from conservative Christian theology. This article from Answers in Genesis expresses this view well. Their bottom line is that God isn't going to let anything bad happen to humans, nor can humans do anything about what God wants to do. It's basically a providential theological argument. But the predominant ideology behind anti-global warming is political and economic rather than religious. The percentage of religious conservatives is a small proportion of all of those who object to global warming. I recall this graphic differentiating between religious and political conservatism and their overlap in the religious right. With global warming, the religious right, again, is reliably anti-global warming, and most political conservatives are usually anti-global warming as well. But there's not necessarily a close association between religious conservatism and anti-global warming. There is a substantial group of green Christians who are environmentalists. They favor creation care or stewardship theology rather than dominion theology. And they are outside of the anti-global warming movement. So ideologically, anti-global warming reflects a political or economic ideological foundation rather than a religious one. I believe surveys have not really differentiated this religious right component, which clouds the issue of who believes what and why. Sorry, I skipped ahead on that. When it comes to evolution, we've learned that the biggest problem we have had to deal with is dichotomous thinking, that there are only two alternatives. You're either a good guy Christian creationist or you're a bad guy evolutionist atheist. You have to choose between faith and science. Now, of course, that dichotomy is false. There are many intermediate positions that accept both faith and science. It's not so much the science as the consequences of the science. As I mentioned before, conservative Christians believe that if evolution is true, they're going to lose big. Feared is the loss of God, the loss of salvation, a guide to morals and ethics. There are many reasons to want evolution not to be true. What needs to be done is to inform the public that there are many positions between these two dichotomies, which weakens the dichotomy and may open up the individual to listening to the science. If the fingers are stuck firmly in the ears, no amount of science will penetrate. There is a continuum, not a dichotomy, of religious positions between creation and evolution. And there are many intermediate positions that an individual can choose to be on. Certainly there are religious positions that do not allow for evolution, but the important point here is that there are more that do. It is not a dichotomy. Things like the existence of God, salvation, and morality have been widely discussed in the theological literature of Catholicism and moderate Protestant Christianity. Helping the public to understand this is necessary to replace the dichotomous thinking that is the root of anti-evolutionism. Similarly with climate change, there is a false dichotomy that one cannot be a political conservative unless one rejects global warming. You have to choose between the political ideology and the science. As with evolution, it's necessary to disrupt this dichotomous thinking with accurate information about the many intermediate positions. Political conservatism is not monolithic on this topic. Republicans for Environmental Protection is the source of this particular website. And on this site, you'll find George Shultz, Ronald Reagan, and other prominent Republicans cited quite frequently. But just as Catholics and mainstream Protestants may be unaware of their denomination's views towards evolution, so many Republicans are unaware of the environmental tradition within the party. Note the National Registry of Green Republicans, who, as in the case of evangelical Christians who accept evolution, may be the ambassadors to their fellows. Similarly, scientists who accept global warming but who are also political conservatives may have additional credibility with their political compatriots. But what is really going on in the political arena is not a discussion about science per se, but about the consequences of global warming. If global warming is happening, what, if anything, should be done about it? This is a policy argument, not a scientific argument. The endpoints are intervention or leaving things alone. And there are many intermediate positions. And in my opinion, these are the things we should be fighting over, not the science. Shifting the discussion to the consequences on which people can legitimately have differences of opinion and accepting the science for what it tells us may be a partial solution to our problem of communicating science in these controversial issues. Daniel Patrick Moynihan's adage is good to remember. Everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not his own facts. Opinions and facts are different. Citizens certainly are entitled to have and contend for different solutions for what to do about climate change or how to deal with the religious consequences of evolution. But the science of both evolution and of climate change is strong. And both evolution and climate change need to be taught in science classes as they are understood by scientists as valid scientific fields, not be qualified by being presented as weak science. One final thought about communicating the science. There is much research showing that it is difficult to change misconceptions of science. Constructivist education shows that a student needs to be made aware of the disconnect between what the student understands and what the accurate explanation is. In order to change that misconception, the student has to work out or construct the correct explanation. Just shoveling accurate science on top isn't going to do the job. And it's even more difficult to change somebody's mind when they not only have misconceptions, but when those misconceptions are rooted or have the foundation of an ideological position, which prevents them from actually listening to the science. So it's useful to consider the composition of the public that you're trying to educate. There are going to be strong rejectors and there are going to be strong acceptors, but most of the people are going to be in the middle. At NCSE, we have not expended many resources trying to convince conservative Christians to accept the science of evolution, although we have encouraged evangelical Christians who accept evolution to reach out to their fellows. And it's, of course, a continuum. It's the extremes that are the most difficult to reach, and the farther from the center one gets, the more difficult it is to make a case. When ideology is involved, the task becomes yet more difficult. It's necessary to get the fingers out of the ears before the science can even be listened to. So what can I say in summary? Well, it's not just about the science. Information is important, and as scientists we should never shrink from presenting accurate science. But rejection of evolution and climate change is not merely a knowledge deficit issue that will be corrected by presenting more science. We have to take into consideration the ideological foundation of scientific rejection and incorporate it into our solution. We can weaken the ideological opposition by weakening the dichotomous reasoning that characterizes these disciplines. We need to find intermediate positions that bring people to the center and find those positions that resonate with people. In the case of global warming and the fact that it's a political ideology, we need to look at things like personal liberty, economic or security issues that resonate with the people who oppose the science. We also need to separate the science from the consequences of the science. It is simply fuzzy thinking to believe that we should reject the science simply because we don't like the consequences of the science. Christian theologians have wrestled with this regarding the consequences of evolution for Christian theology. We should not expect less of those rejecting global warming for political or economic reasons. The National Center for Science Education is ncse.com. If you are interested in these topics of global warming and evolution and what's going on in the public, we have a free Friday electronic newsletter that you can sign up for if you click this button here. Our climate change website resources will take you to this page where we have a number of topics that we hope you will pursue, and obviously we would be delighted if you could join. So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this symposium, and Rudy, congratulations on your splendid decades of work at ACS, and I have a feeling you are not going to have a quiet retirement. Thanks again.